So about a year ago, I made a video about how I translate Japanese swearing, and I felt like getting another one of my videos demonetized, so I thought I'd do a part 2. If you haven't already, I highly recommend that you watch part 1 of my Japanese swearing video, because it puts some of the things that I'm going to say into better context. Just to recap, I talked about in the first video how the Japanese language doesn't exactly have swearing the same way that the English language has swearing, so there aren't any exact equivalents for the swear words. Swearing doesn't actually exist so much in Japanese as it does in English. Yes, there are rude things that you can say to other people, yes, there are vulgar things that you can say, but it's not the same as English swearing.
You know what I mean? It's just like we've decided there'll be some words we won't say all the time. And I was just trying to find out which words they were. For sure. All of them. I wanted a list.
In part 1 of the video, I went over a few common swear words and how I translate them, and so I've just compiled a list of even more profane and vulgar words, and I'm going to explain how I translate them. Another thing that I touched upon in part 1 of the video is that I'm actually not allowed to have a lot of swearing in my translations, mostly. For Ultimate games, they want to keep it, they say like Disney movies, basically, G, PG, which is weird because they'll have like really violent scenes and stuff, but heaven forbid that a character say shit. Sometimes, if I'm translating anime, I'm allowed to have some profanity in there, but they prefer to err on the side of less profanity. So even if I think that it would be the most appropriate to translate something a character is saying as fuck off, I am almost never allowed to translate it thus. So while I personally might think might be the best translation for something, I'm not necessarily allowed to use because censorship. So the first curse word I want to look at is che. So che isn't exactly like a swear word. It's more like darn, drat, ugh. Aw man, it's that kind of sound that people make when they are upset about something not going the way they wanted to. Like if I rolled dice in a game and I got snake eyes when I was hoping for 2 6s, I might go, "Chet." Like, ah, fuck. So, as I demonstrated just now, I mean, depending on what kind of person you are and what kind of situation you're in, something like, ah, shit, or ah, fuck, or something like that, it's definitely not vulgar and like fuck. You can say che in a conversation with normal people. You'd get a little bit in trouble maybe if you used it with people that are of higher status than you. You wouldn't necessarily want to whip out a che in the boardroom with your bosses unless you're really cool with them. But yeah, I'll usually translate che as "aw man" or "geez," or if that character actually is the kind of character that would say it, something like "shoot."
Darn it.
The next word is ketsu. Ketsu actually is vulgar. It means ass. And ketsu no ana literally means asshole, but they don't use it the same way that we would. You wouldn't chase after somebody who just stole your bagel and go, "You ketsu no ana!" It's not used the same way we use asshole, but yes, ketsu is indeed vulgar. If you want to talk about your butt in a polite way, you say oshiri, but ketsu definitely is slangy and vulgar. I remember when I started using ketsu occasionally in conversation when I was in Japan, my host one would be like, oshiri. She'd be like, don't say that. So it is definitely a vulgar word, and I would translate it as ass, unless I am not allowed to use the word ass in my translation, in which case I'd use some kind of slangy word for butt. I would not say butt necessarily, because sometimes people sound really unnatural. Like if you're saying, "Oh, I landed on my butt." I don't know, like sometimes if a tough guy says that, it just sounds funny. It sounds like he's going out of his way to not swear. So I would translate it as like my cheeks or tush or buns or booty or, you know, some other slangy term for butt. So in the first video, I also referenced that in high school, I had this like 2-page document printed out of just all the vulgar swear words. And on this page, one of the sentences that really tickled me pink was "kusoshite nero." And it literally means shit and then go to sleep. So I've actually seen this used in manga and in anime a couple times, and it's usually, you say it usually to like a kid or to someone who's being childish, someone who's being annoying. The whole phrase is sort of like "gaki wa kusoshite nero." It's like, come on, little boy, just have a shit and go to bed. And the sentiment behind that is like, fuck off, go away, leave me alone. But it's not necessarily that vulgar. As I said, I've encountered it in manga and anime that's meant for all ages. Kuso, as I covered in the first video, does indeed mean excrement, and it is indeed a vulgar version of the word for excrement, so shit is a pretty decent translation of it, except you are allowed to say kuso on TV in Japan at all hours of the day, whereas you are not allowed to say shit on American TV at all hours of the day, even though everybody uses it commonly in their daily conversation, and I don't know why everyone's getting all worked up over the word shit. I mean, come on, everybody says it, shit, 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 shit. But I digress. If I were to encounter kusoshiteneru in a thing that I was translating, I would probably do it in like a condescending manner. I'd be like, okay, little girl, you go poop and go to bed, or okay, little girl, go on, go to bed and leave me alone. Because you're saying it usually to someone who's not necessarily a kid, but you're just like, okay, leave the adults alone now. Let the adults have their time. It's more just a condescending thing that you say to somebody. So wouldn't necessarily translate it literally as like, okay, go poop and then go to bed, but I would make it condescending. The next two insults are misogynistic, and they're also not exactly swear words. The first one is kono ama. So kono it means literally this, but when you're saying it to someone, and in fact you can wind up, as I explained in the first video, and go kono, which means like, why you? Ama literally means none, so it's like, oh, you none. But if you're insulting a woman with it, it's kind of like you're calling her a bitch or a cunt. Only again, it's not as vulgar as that, but you're definitely using a very womanly word like none as an insult, which itself is misogynistic. So I'd say like, you stupid bitch is probably a really good way of translating kono ama. But if I'm not allowed to use bitch, which I usually am not, I'll usually just settle for something that's still misogynistic but not vulgar, like you stupid girl, or you stupid woman, or you crazy woman, or you crazy girl, or something like that. The next word in this similar category is just onna. So by itself, onna means female or woman, but you would never like call someone just onna if you wanted to be polite. I wouldn't say like ano onna if I'm talking about a woman over there. If I called her ano onna, that's really rude. If I say ano onna no hito, that means like that woman, that lady, that female personage over there. But if I say ano onna, it's like that bitch over there. So yeah, onna, and you can just call someone just onna, kind of like that. So I think bitch is a perfect translation for onna. But again, if I'm not allowed to use bitch, then just something misogynistic that's not really vulgar, like stupid woman or crazy woman. The next one is a lot of fun, kusotare. So you can add tare to the end of various things to kind of turn it into an insult, kind of like you can add like Alec to the end of stuff, or ass. You can add ass to the end of stuff to just kind of turn something into an insult, like you hard ass, you tight ass, you stupid ass. You can kind of do the same thing with tare. So kuso, as we established earlier, means shit. So kuso tare is kind of like you shithead. It doesn't literally mean shit head. That would be like kuso atama. But again, if you call someone a kuso atama in Japanese, they'll be like, but then they might think, that's a weird, unique insult. Maybe I'll start using that. But yeah, kusotare, perfect way to translate it is shithead, but I'm usually not allowed to do that. So I usually go with something like jackass, because I'm usually allowed to use ass if I'm attaching it to jack. So I usually settle for jackass, or even douchebag if I'm allowed to use that. Like sometimes I'm allowed to use douchebag. Guys, it's really sad how my artistic work is censored. Anyway, if you want to call someone a shithead, go kusotare. So this next category of insults that you call a person are technically the words for you or oneself in Japanese, but if you say them to a person, if you call a person them, it kind of becomes an insult. They are teme, onore, anta, koitsu, and aitsu. So teme and onore, if you saw my video about Japanese pronouns, they mean oneself, literally. So if I say onore no kokoro, and if I'm talking about myself, I mean like my own heart. And if I'm talking about you and I say onore no kokoro, that would be your heart. If I'm talking about Bobby over there and I say onore no kokoro and I'm talking about him, I'm meaning his heart. And teme is the same thing. But teme is pretty much always rude. Onore is not rude. Onore is kind of like outdated. But if you go onore, like to someone when you're winding up for a punch and you're gonna punch him or whatever, the ideal way to translate that is damn you. And I'm usually allowed to do that in my translations, so that's usually what I'll go with. If not, and if it is indeed a more old school, like a period piece, I will do something like curse you or blast something like that. Teme is much more contemporary. You've probably seen it a lot in anime, and you've probably seen it translated as like damn you, or maybe even you asshole. Really, you could put anything in there because again, it literally means oneself. No, sick burn, right? It's kind of like saying you are so damn fill in the blank, or you are so fill in the blank. So really any insult, any swear word that you want fits with teme. So I might go son of a ... or I might go damn you, or I might go you douchebag, or I might go you son of a bitch if I'm allowed to, or you stupid ... or you stupid piece of ... You can be really creative with teme. Anta is similar to teme, only anta literally does mean you. It is the rude slash very casual version of anata, and you only really call someone anta if you're kind of insulting them. And it's not necessarily like in a profane way, but it's sort of like girl, you cray cray kind of insulting if you call your anta. Or you might call your significant other that. If you're a woman, you might call your husband anta. But if you call a person with whom you are not close anta, that is very, very rude. It's actually kind of rude to call someone with whom you're not close anata as well. It's just kind of rude in general to use the you pronoun with people unless you're close to them. Kimi is like the only one that's not quite rude. So like omae would also kind of work in the same realm as anta. So if my friend Sally was supposed to be studying for a test, but she was reading manga, I'd be like, Chotto anta, nande manga yonden no? Like, that would be sort of like, hey, you stupid bitch, why are you reading manga? Or, hey, you idiot, why are you reading manga? So anta, it's not necessarily vulgar, it's just kind of rude. So you can kind of get creative and fill in the blank depending on the character. Same with omae. And then we have aitsu and koitsu. Koitsu literally means this person, and aitsu literally means that person, like that person that's over there, not you or me. That's literally what koitsu and aitsu mean. But if I'm driving, that's often when I would hear koitsu being used. It's like, I'm driving and this guy cuts me off, I go, koitsu! I'm not literally saying this person, this guy. I kind of am, you know how sometimes you might be like, this guy, only it's a really angry version of that. It's like, this fucking guy. But that's not exactly what we say when we drive. Just fill in the blank with whatever you would say under your breath if somebody cuts you off while you're driving, and that's basically what koitsu is. And then aitsu, usually I would use that like in a conversation. Again, if I'm talking about Bobby over there or something to my friend, like Bobby, my ex-boyfriend, and he's like, aitsu wa onna gokuro nante shiranai wa. It's like, that cad or that bastard or that son of a bitch, he doesn't understand, you know, women's feelings. It's just kind of a rude way of saying him or her. So that bitch, that bastard, that douchebag, or just kind of add a frickin' into your conversation or a damn into your conversation and you're covered. Here's another grammar rule that's not really swearing, but it's rude. And you've probably noticed this if you've seen plenty of anime, especially shonen anime, and that is if you change the nai ending of verbs, basically the negative form of a verb when there's a nai at the end of it, if you change the nai to ne, you've probably heard plenty of that in anime. Aru wa kia ne daro? Or so ja ne daro, or something like that. Literally that means like, of course that's not the case, or that's wrong and you know it. That's like literally what those two things that I just said mean. But because I added the ne, if I changed the nai to ne, and this works also with like adjectives like omoshiroi. Some people might say omoshirei. Or even I've heard kakkoi as kakkei. It's basically just really slangy and really masculine, but I'd say just very contemporary slangy, young. No, it's not young. It's not young. It's old people say it too. But it definitely is a little more masculine. And it's one of those things that it's not exactly rude or profane if you're using this when you're talking with people that are your equal or people that are lower than you for sure. But if I'm using this, like if I say something is omoshirei in front of my boss, that's kind of rude. So I really like, I mean, this is kind of starting to get outdated and I'm really discouraged from using very current slang or from regionalisms, but I really like using hella in those situations with ne, like omoshirei, be like, it's hella cool, or frickin' also I think is a really great word to use, but I'd be discouraged. I think I did use frickin' once in a translation and I got a note like, oh, don't use that because like that implies fucking, so don't use that. And hella also, they're also a little bit squeamish about, because sometimes they're even upset about me using hell in my translations, like what the hell? And because hella is quite Californian, I'm from California, so I'm allowed to use it. But yeah, even I don't really use it anymore. It is kind of outdated at this point, but I think hella works super, super well for ne, or your a endings of adjectives and whatnot. So on that note, another thing that's not exactly swearing, but if you're basically using the plain speech pattern, the plain forms of verbs, like the do and u endings of verbs instead of masu endings of verbs with people that are superior to you, then that's kind of rude, and sometimes I would translate that as profane or a little bit of swearing if given the opportunity. So like if I'm in the office and I'm looking for Yamada, my coworker, and I go up to my boss and I'm like, "Oi, Yamada wa doko?" or Yamada wa doko da? That's really rude. I should be something like Yamada wa ima doko ni? Or, you know, trailing off in a very vague, apologetic sort of way, bowing whilst saying so. But if I'm just like in very plain, not polite Japanese, like, "Hey, where's Yamada?" If given the opportunity, I might translate that as, "Hey, where the hell is Yamada?" Or at the very least, I would use simpler, lower level versions of words, kind of like a second grader or a third grader might use. And
I know words, I have the best words.
Then I also might use contractions a lot. Like I might even turn words that aren't supposed to be a contraction into a contraction, or kind of slur two words together with an apostrophe, just to show that that person's being not very careful when they're talking and being kind of rude. But if given the opportunity, a little bit of swearing works in that case as well. The next word is one of my favorite words, and it is oppai. So you might have seen this translated as tits or something a little more vulgar for boobs, but really boobs is an absolutely perfect translation of oppai. It is exactly the level of slang and vulgarity that oppai is. Oppai is not vulgar. It's kind of impolite. Like you wouldn't use the word oppai in like polite conversation with your boss necessarily. But you wouldn't exactly say boobs in the presence of your boss in polite conversation either, depending on who your boss is. Yeah, for oppai, boobs, kind of a no-brainer, which is a pretty good segue into actual vulgar words that are indeed censored on TV and in manga. If you're ever reading Japanese manga and you see like one of the characters is replaced with a circle, like a large circle, that's their way of censoring. Sometimes it's like a triangle or a square even, but usually a circle is their simple way of censoring something in manga. And then on TV and anime and whatnot, they will sometimes even have a little ding noise in there. So the first two words are words that they actually borrowed from us, and that is fakku and sekusu. So fakku, actually, you're not necessarily going to have that censored out. I remember in the GTO manga, they didn't censor out fakku. And indeed, even though they know that it's vulgar and they know that like it's our swear word or whatever, it's fuck basically, to them it doesn't quite have the same impact that fuck has for us. Like if I were watching daytime TV and somebody said fuck uncensored, I'd be like, I wouldn't be offended because who the fuck cares? But it would be like, whoa, you don't say that on TV at that time of day. But in Japanese, because it's a foreign swear word, it has as little impact to them as something like kuso has to the average American. Even though we might intellectually know what it means and like, hee, it's a swear word, hee. It's kind of that reaction instead of a, oh my God, I can't believe he said that kind of reaction. So I have yet to actually come across fakku in anything that I'm translating. But if I did, if it was not a porno, I would probably not translate it as fuck, to be honest, because again, to them, it doesn't have the same level's impact as it does to us. So I would downgrade it to something like damn or hell or shit or whatever I'm allowed to do. And then sekusu, that actually is kind of an embarrassing word for them to use. They do have their own word for sexual intercourse, seikou suru. Usually they'll just use a vague euphemism like yaru, which literally means to do, but it also means to do. Sekusu is kind of closer in a way to fuck as a verb in English. I think screw is probably a decent one, because to screw someone, that is considered kind of vulgar. Even though not as vulgar as to fuck someone. So that was probably how I would translate sekusu. But again, I've never come across it yet in something that I've had to translate professionally. And the next word would definitely get bleeped on TV or anywhere else that's not a porno, and that is manko, which means pussy. That's pretty straightforward. It's like I would not translate it as vagina or something like non-vulgar, because it is indeed a very vulgar word. Don't use that in daily conversation. Yeah, if it were to show up in anything I was translating, it would probably be a porno, and of course I translate it as pussy. Along those lines, as I mentioned in the other video, I learned like 13 words for penis or something back in the day. A lot of them are just kind of variants on like one root word, and then they have all these like way different variations of saying the root word, like different suffixes and prefixes, and like reversing the syllables in Japanese Pig Latin. But my two favorite words and the two most common words that I've seen for penis or cock are chimpo and chinko. And yeah, you wouldn't translate those as penis necessarily, because penis is a little scientific. It would be dick or cock, and you would typically only see those uncensored in a porno. So now that I've taught you all the words that you're not allowed to say, and not allowed to translate properly for that matter, the next time you are watching anime, keep your ears open and see if you can hear some of these.
And I know there are some other words that many of you are wondering about, why they haven't been considered, why they haven't shown up on the list thus far. We're looking at them all very closely. Some of your favorites might make the list this year.
We really have to get creative as translators when we translate Japanese profanity, given the censorship restrictions and the fact that swearing in our languages are just so different. If you have any really unique and interesting swear words in your native language, let me know. Well, I have had enough of this video, so kusoshite nero!